1977. On one of the beaches of Rio de Janeiro, there is Ronnie, who is around 50, accompanied by a blonde woman half his age. From the outside, he may appear to be an ordinary British tourist experiencing a midlife crisis. However, his attraction to the sunny beaches of Rio is not solely due to the beautiful ocean views and young Brazilian women in bikinis. In Britain, he has been wanted for over 10 years for his involvement in one of the most notorious robberies of the 20th century. On an August night in 1963, the Royal Mail train is heading from the northern regions to London. Inside the carriages, several dozen employees are sorting letters, a routine task for the postal service. However, in one of the carriages, there was something far more valuable than letters and envelopes. 50 kilometers from the final destination, the driver stops the train upon noticing a red signal ahead. His assistant goes out to check and, seeing the silhouettes of several men by one of the carriages, assumes they are railway workers. Strangers approach, clad in military uniforms and balaclavas. This marks the beginning of what appears to be one of the most significant robberies of the 20th century. The criminals took just 30 minutes to detach several carriages, move them, deal with the guards, and steal over 50 million pounds in today's prices. Military gear and balaclavas. However, the most thrilling part of this story is that the robbery itself merely sets the stage. What follows are years and decades of searches for the criminals, prison escapes, identity changes, plastic surgeries, and successful attempts to disappear on other continents. Thus unfolds the tale of the Great Train Robbery. To begin with, it is worth mentioning the man who robbed a train, but did so 60 years ago, and not in reality. I am referring to the film The Great Train Robbery from 1900, a 12-minute short that changed the course of cinema history. In this case, we are not concerned with the plot or artistic qualities. In the first half of the 20th century, the phrase, "the Great Train Robbery," was exclusively associated with cinema. However, on August 8, 1963, everything changed. At night, the Royal Mail train is traveling from Glasgow to London, pulling 12 carriages, which house 70 employees engaged in sorting letters. This is an exceptional case, except for the second carriage, where bags of money are transported on the night runs of the mail trains. The train operating between Glasgow and London has been in service for over 100 years, and during all this time, the journey has gone smoothly. Along the way, the train makes several stops to collect letters and load bags of cash from small bank branches, which are then delivered to the main offices in London. On the night of August 8th, the train had already covered a significant portion of its route, with only a few stops remaining before reaching the British capital. Meanwhile, on a farm in the English countryside, 16 men in uniform are preparing for a robbery that will change their lives forever. One of them, 31-year-old Bruce Reynolds, dreams of a luxurious life, loves fast cars, and stylish suits. His appearance is more reminiscent of a young actor from a Christopher Nolan film than a criminal mastermind. Bruce is considered one of the main organizers of the Great Train Robbery. Another key figure in the operation, Gordon Goody, is a sociable and open person. However, he is capable of displaying brutality. He has nearly 10 convictions, including robbery with violence and illegal possession of firearms. Most of the other gang members are also around 30 years old and have previously been involved in various illegal, albeit not very serious activities in London. The preparation and gathering of the robbers took place on a farm in Buckinghamshire, which had been purchased just a few months before the robbery. The location for the operation has been chosen thoughtfully. Firstly, it is situated in an isolated rural area, which reduces the number of potential witnesses. Secondly, the farm is located not far from the target of the robbery, but not too close, about 20 kilometers away, to avoid any obvious connection between the two locations for the police. I'm sorry, but you did not provide a complete paragraph for translation. Please provide the text you would like to have translated. The robbers transfer into 3 vehicles, one of which is a truck. All the cars and the criminals' uniforms are in khaki, which is no coincidence. There are several military bases in the area, and locals see vehicles with soldiers on a daily basis. The criminals hope that this military disguise will not attract attention. The accomplices, having loaded up, head towards the train carrying the mail cargo. For the chief engineer, Jack Mills, and his assistant, this shift does not have any particular signs. They do not suspect that the second carriage of their train is designated for particularly valuable goods. At that moment, it contains an amount of money that Mills could not earn even in several lifetimes. Let's go back a year to the moment when the story of the famous train robbery began. In 1962, a robbery took place at the airline ticket office in London, from which $60,000 was stolen, just over £1 million in today's equivalents. The amount is not large, especially considering that. However, the names of the criminals are noteworthy in this case. Among them are Bruce Reynolds, Gordon Goody, and 4 other future train robbers. One of the security guards at the airline ticket office recognized Goody among the attackers. For Gordon, this could have meant a significant prison sentence, but the defense made every effort and managed to dismantle the charges. One of the lawyers also had connections in the criminal world and introduced Goody to Ronald Edwards, suggesting they meet with a man nicknamed Osterman. The real name of this man remains unknown, but his nickname was written on his jacket. This very Osterman worked in the postal service and was aware that the mail train traveling from Glasgow to London occasionally carried cash. He knew that the cash was dispatched at night on certain days and that after the summer banking holidays, the carriage would contain an amount significantly exceeding the usual, while the guards on the train consisted of only a few unarmed individuals. Less than a year later, on the night of August 8th, around 3 o'clock, the accomplices arrive at their final destination, the Brago Railway Bridge, located between 2 sparsely populated stations. This quiet place is perfect for transferring heavy bags of cash into a parked car. Although the plan appeared simple in theory, the operation required careful preparation and precise execution. Each of the 6 robbers had their own assigned number and a clear action plan. According to their calculations, the accomplices had only half an hour from the moment the train stopped to carry out their scheme before the dispatchers and police could react. One of the main difficulties in robbing a train is that it moves and only stops at stations and depots, where there is heightened security. Therefore, before carrying out an attack on the train, it is necessary to... Roger Corddry was invited to join the gang. He led a small group that had successfully carried out train thefts. However, they operated in a different part of the country and on a significantly smaller scale than what was planned in this case. Without 103, the robbers take their positions. One group positions itself to the right, while the other stands to the left of the railway tracks. Two of the criminals head towards the nearest signal, where they will need to set it to red and, at the right moment, switch the active green to force the train to begin braking. However, the person responsible for setting the signals makes a critical mistake that jeopardizes the entire operation. Instead of simply turning off the green signal, he unscrews the light bulb. As a result, the dispatchers at the nearest station are immediately notified, and one of them heads out to check the situation. The mail train slowly approaches the designated point. The engineer notices the light signal and begins to brake the train, as the presence of a stop signal at this location and time is considered quite unusual. However, the green signal, he unscrews the light bulb from it. However, there are ongoing repair works in the area, and the engineer believes that this is somehow related to the situation. After the train stops, the assistant jumps out of the locomotive and runs to the nearest phone to contact the dispatchers. However, the connection is down, as the robbers had cut the wires in advance. He notices the silhouettes of people near the car and assumes they are workers. As he approaches closer, the assistant sees that these individuals are wearing balaclavas. One of the robbers pushes him, causing him to fall while raising a baton to his partner's face. The criminal threatens to kill him if he screams. At this time, Engineer Mills leaves his cabin. A man with a baton approaches him. Unaware that the number of accomplices exceeds a dozen, he decides to resist and receives a heavy blow to the head. As a result, he ends up bloodied, and handcuffs are placed on him and the assistant. It seems they could move on to the second car to neutralize the guards and extract the bags of money, but there is an important detail. The thing is that... But there is one significant point. The train stopped about a kilometer before the bridge. This was expected due to the positioning of the signals, so the robbers realized that they would have to move the train to the bridge on their own. However, why move the entire train when only the locomotive and the first two cars are needed? By uncoupling them, they can also leave 70 postal workers inside. This is exactly what two members of the gang do to get the train to the bridge. Among the group of robbers is an elderly engineer, but suddenly the locomotive does not move for some reason. The robbers are still unaware that the railway employees have already received a signal from the non-functioning signal, and one of the workers has gone to investigate. At the same time, the operation is at risk of failure. The train is not moving, and time is running out. Almost a dozen robbers in the engineer's cabin begin to get nervous, as by uncoupling the first two cars, they have damaged critically important connection systems. One of the workers went to investigate. The engineer who was captured by the robbers had only worked with other types of trains throughout his life and does not understand the cause of the problem due to his lack of experience. The robbers find a thoughtless but effective way. They threaten the injured engineer. Mills takes control and brings the cars to the Braga Bridge. From there, only the technical part of the job remains. The robbers break the windows of the second car and open the doors. They order several unarmed guards to lie face down. Then they begin to haul out 120 heavy bags containing over 600 bundles of banknotes. The total weight of this cargo exceeds 2 tons. Bruce Reynolds, who has been watching everything unfold, checks his watch. 3:30. The half hour allocated for the operation has expired. It's time to wrap things up and head to the farm. The robbers order the engineers and guards to stay in place for half an hour so that their accomplice can escape. All the gang members get into the cars loaded with money, and most of them are in a state of euphoria, still unaware of the exact amount they have stolen. But one thing they understand for sure, this sum is enough to divide their lives into before and after. Despite their experience in criminal activities, none of the participants had ever been truly wealthy. Rather, their incomes are unstable and quickly dwindle. Most of the accomplices come from poor post-war families, and robbing the train represents a chance for them to rebuild their lives. At first glance, the Great Train Robbery appears almost perfect. As in any successful crime, luck played a role for the accomplices. During the operation, no cars passed by that could notice what was happening and call the police. Furthermore, the railway employees sent to check the broken signal arrived only after the accomplices had long since left. Nevertheless, overall, the robbers successfully executed their plans. Within half an hour, they reach. At the same time, the railway employee sent to check the signal comes across a dozen mail cars. He finds the first 2 cars and the locomotive a little further down. Due to the severed wires, he is unable to contact the dispatcher or the police. Eventually, law enforcement begins to receive information about the incident only closer to 5:00 a.m., when the first police officers arrive at the crime scene. It turns out that railway workers removed 2 cars and the locomotive from the bridge and took them to the nearest station to clear the tracks for passing trains. The same happened with the signal used by the robbers. Instead of leaving it in its original state until the police arrived, the employee simply repaired it. On one hand, the decisions made by the railway workers can be explained by logic. It is necessary to restore traffic on the tracks and avoid potential accidents. On the other hand, this leads to the loss of many important pieces of evidence for the investigation. Ultimately, the police at the crime scene will find only a few items: handcuffs used by the robbers on the train driver, a leather glove, a piece of rebar, batteries, a fragment of white fabric, and other things. However, this list is not particularly significant. Far more important is the fact that no evidence or fingerprints linking the robbers to the events of that night on the railway will be found at the scene. In addition, the police are unable to determine the exact amount of stolen money, as it belonged to 8 different banks. It will take an entire day for a final analysis of the situation, but the robbers will learn this information much sooner. After counting the contents of 120 bags, the total amount comes to over 2.6 million pounds, which in today's money is equivalent to more than 50 million. The value of the pound is approximately equal to or slightly above that of the dollar. As a result, each participant will receive a sufficient amount to last a lifetime, especially with proper management. The robbers' initial plan regarding their next steps was as follows. The accomplices had organized supplies of food and entertainment in advance, such as a game of Monopoly and magazines. Although the robbers' actions seem quite measured and well thought out, they left no evidence at the crime scene. The farm's remoteness from prying eyes and the police creates the opportunity to head to exotic islands and enjoy life. The robbers, however, made several serious mistakes, the main one being the idea of hiding on a farm in the English countryside. By the end of the day on August 8th, the train robbery becomes the central topic of discussion across the country. It is talked about during lunches, at work, and in pubs. The phrase, "the Great Train Robbery," echoes through all media, and it is likely that the media contributes to the scale of this event. Journalists quickly begin to label the robbers as criminal geniuses, while ignoring the obvious flaws in the security system of the mail train. How did they learn about the money in the carriage? These details do not particularly interest the public. The mysterious image of the super robbers is already a separate topic. The details available to the police are quite limited. Evidence at the crime scene and witnesses become crucial resources for the investigation. Let's take a moment to play detectives. Recall the details of the crime, specifically the words of the robbers, and consider what information might be most valuable for the investigation. If you wish, you can even pause the video. The robbers hardly communicated during the operation. Each knew their tasks. They referred to each other by numbers, and their faces were concealed by masks. After some deduction, the investigators from Scotland Yard conclude that the criminals are likely within a 30-minute drive from the Braga Bridge. In addition, the assistant engineer, lying face down, spotted one of the accomplices' vehicles, a khaki truck. The police decide to share this information with reporters, and it is announced on the radio that the robbers used vehicles resembling military ones. Panic ensues on the farm where the criminals are hiding. They face two main problems. The first is that their base is not located in bustling London, but it is also not situated in a deserted wilderness. There are other residents in the vicinity who may have seen their vehicles both before and after the robbery. The second problem is even more serious. The robbers needed to leave with the stolen money in these vehicles, and their plan is now clearly a failure. Repainting the cars could have helped, but there is not enough paint on the farm. As a result, the only available mode of transportation is a single bicycle, which must be shared among them all. As a result, Roger Corddry takes the bicycle and heads to the home of an acquaintance to solve the transportation problem. As you can see, this is a brilliant solution. Now, repainting the vehicles has clearly become impossible. The brilliant robbery no longer seems so. And when I mentioned that the farm has become the robbers' most serious failure, this is exactly what I meant. The idea of establishing a base in the village could only have come from those who have lived their entire lives in the city. There are no secrets in the village. The residents are well aware of their neighbors' affairs. The small population makes everyone noticeable. However, the main problem is not organizing the process on the farm, but rather how everyone can get there at the same time. Once the job is finished, the accomplices could immediately leave for London and arrive in an hour, making them difficult to find afterward. The only reason they went to the farm with the money was distrust. Everyone wanted to verify the amount stolen and receive their fair share. This fact explains why their scheme will fail in the future and debunks the myth that the gray cardinal and the main beneficiary. Listening to the radio, panic on the farm intensifies. It becomes clear that the arrival of the police is just a matter of time. The robbers attempt to destroy evidence by burning their gear and equipment, but soon realize that the smoke will attract attention. They then begin to clean items of fingerprints and other traces. Analyzing the situation, it becomes evident that the train robbery was only half successful, as the accomplices had not thought through an escape plan. To jump ahead, I should note that only 2 out of the 6 took care to create any sort of alibi at the time of the robbery. For many of the accomplices, it seemed that everything would be fine as soon as they got the money. Meanwhile, the police are effectively utilizing all available resources. Witness testimonies, along with reports from informants, become important elements in the investigation. In the post-war decades, the line between law and crime in Britain becomes noticeably blurred. The former often engaged in semi-legal activities, while the latter shamelessly resorted to methods far from the law. For the police, paying informants in criminal circles was a completely routine matter. Investigators from the so-called Flying Squad of Scotland Yard, which deals with thefts and robberies, employ this method. Based on information from several informants, a list of potential suspects is compiled, most of whom will ultimately be apprehended. Meanwhile, vehicles resembling army or repainted military trucks are being stopped on the roads. The list of possible farms and country houses where the robbers could be hiding gradually shrinks, and the reward for important information significantly increases. Ultimately, it reaches $260,000, a colossal sum for that time, equivalent to about $5 million today. This attracts the attention and activity of concerned citizens, providing the police with a wealth of information. 5 days after the robbery, 2 local inspectors set out to check one of the farms in Buckinghamshire. The police find significant supplies of food, dishes, numerous rolls of toilet paper, and other signs of a recent stay by a large number of people. However, the main discoveries are khaki suits, masks, gloves, as well as a multitude of money bags, wrappers from bundles of banknotes, and $600 in cash. Sherlock Holmes, to connect this location with one of the largest robberies in British history, relies on the fact that the condition of the farm left by the robbers indicates their state of panic. This explains such unexpected behavior for seasoned criminals. Many years later, those involved in these events will insist that a separate person should have been responsible for cleaning the farm of evidence, who, for some reason, failed to accomplish this task. However, it is highly likely that this is merely a myth related to the Great Train Robbery. All the robbers managed to find transportation and leave the farm. It should be noted that, for example, Bruce Reynolds managed to obtain. At that time, it was an expensive sports car, similar to the modern desire to leave the scene of the crime discreetly in a Ferrari. The most sensible decision for the robbers was to hide with acquaintances from the criminal world, knowing that the police were on their trail. Some of them began to consider how to leave the country. One of the obvious advantages for the accomplices was having money, which solves many life difficulties. It is worth mentioning the banknotes. Can the robbers actually use their loot if the banknotes have serial numbers that allow them to be tracked? In the postal carriage, there were various denominations, Scottish, Irish, as well as banknotes from different years of issue. Some of the older notes were even earmarked for destruction to remove them from circulation. However, this is not all that important. What truly matters is that most of the banknotes had a denomination of 150, and the total amount exceeded 2.5 million. The police were only aware of the serial numbers of 1,400 of them. In general, the robbers can use their funds without fearing being caught. Meanwhile, the options for the accomplices are gradually dwindling. The police have an accurate list of suspects compiled based on informant data, and various witnesses are beginning to identify the accomplices. Their photographs are published in newspapers. A week later, 2 are arrested while attempting to rent a garage. The owner recognizes them and immediately informs the police. One of the arrested, Roger Cordry, is responsible for stopping the train. Upon his arrest, he tries to hide the key to the apartment with the money in his anus, but fails. The police seize all his funds, around $140,000. This gives an idea of each participant's share. A day later, a couple unexpectedly finds several bags of money in the woods. Inside, along with the banknotes, there is a check from a Bavarian hotel made out to Mr. Field. Lawyer Brian Field was one of those who had once organized $140,000. The house of cards of the Great Robbery begins to collapse rapidly. Over the course of several months, the police arrest more than 10 suspects. Only a few remain at large. Each event in this investigation is widely covered in the media, turning it into a kind of reality show, as what is happening is reality. The news is followed not only by astonished viewers, but also by the participants in the robbery, who fear being caught. Some, like Bruce Reynolds, attempt to create fake documents to escape the country, while others decide to radically change their appearance. Ronald Edwards decides to adopt a strict diet. After a thorough analysis of the farm, experts discover several hundred fingerprints, many of which match those of the arrested individuals. In early 1964, the trial begins for those accused of robbing the Royal Mail train. This becomes the most sensational case in British history. A large number of journalists, the girlfriends and wives of the defendants, as well as an interested public, draw significant attention to the case. The prosecutors face the challenge. The connection of most of the defendants to the farm is evident, as their fingerprints were found there. However, it is necessary to prove that these individuals participated in the robbery, rather than simply being present at the base as passive accomplices. The main witnesses, the guards and train drivers, cannot help, as none of them saw the faces of the criminals. This is what most of the defendants are counting on. They admit their guilt as accomplices, but deny involvement in the actual crime. However, one should not expect lenient sentences or acquittals for the men in the dock. Such intense scrutiny of the case works against them, as both the jurors and the judges are merely human. For the past few months, the main news in the country has been the Great Train Robbery, particularly its colossal scale and audacity. The guilty verdict from the jury is unlikely to surprise anyone, but the severity of the sentences handed down by the court shocks most. Many of the accused received prison sentences ranging from 20 to 30 years. At the same time, the average prison sentences for rape and murder in Britain are nearly half as long. Many residents of the country realize that the punishment does not fit the severity of the crime. However, those participants in the robbery who are still at large are also aware of this. Despite the arrests and fines for most of the accomplices, the story of the Great Train Robbery is far from over. It will stretch over half a century, and unexpected twists await us ahead. Many are likely to have a justifiable question. All right, most of the robbers have been caught, but what about the money? Did the police manage to find it? This question is indeed important, not only out of curiosity about other people's money, but also because it directly affects the unfolding events. Let me remind you that the stolen amount was around $6 million. During the arrests, the police managed to recover only a few $100,000. It is not hard to guess that the rest of the money is still with the robbers. This is further confirmed by the fact that all the accused. Where did the poor robbers get such money? This is a rhetorical question. However, the funds are of interest not only to the captured robbers, but also to those who are still at large. Bruce Reynolds, one of the main organizers of the robbery, is closely following the news. He notices that his partner Gordon Goody is receiving a 30-year sentence and does not want to share his fate. Using connections in criminal circles, Reynolds rents a private plane and flies to Brussels, where he creates a new identity with the help of forged documents in order to then move to Mexico. Later, Ronald Edwards joins Reynolds, also arriving in Mexico with forged documents and even going through an unsuccessful plastic surgery. In the first weeks, he suffers from an infection while remaining easily recognizable. Along with the fugitives, their wives and children moved to another continent, and although there was not an abundance of new content in the mid-60s, a year after the Great Train Robbery, people gradually begin to forget about the case. Those who were caught are already serving their sentences, while those who remain at large are far from sight. Life goes on, and new events begin to appear in the news. However, soon an event occurs that causes many to remember the most famous robbery in the country once again. In August 1964, several masked individuals throw a rope ladder over the wall of a prison in central Britain. After they tie up a guard, they begin to move toward the cell where 30-year-old Charlie Wilson, one of the accomplices of the Great Train Robbery, is located. They order Wilson to get dressed and follow them. The masked men leave the prison as quickly as they arrived. The entire operation takes just a few minutes. There are two main versions of the events. According to one, Wilson hired masked individuals for his escape, while the other suggests that they were criminals. It remains unclear which version is more plausible and where Wilson was hiding after his escape. This story certainly sparks renewed interest in the Great Train Robbery. For the police, it creates additional problems, as yet another robber is added to the list of several already wanted, and it seems that this is not the end of it. A year later, in July 1965, at Wandsworth Prison in the suburbs of London, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an elderly neighbor notices several masked men armed with weapons climbing onto the roof of a car by the prison wall. They reach the top of the wall and throw down a rope ladder on the opposite side. Meanwhile, inmates in the adjacent yard are playing sports, and upon seeing the ladder, several of them quickly head toward the wall. The guards immediately try to stop them, but other inmates obstruct their efforts. The fugitives leap over the wall, jump onto the roof of the car, and then head towards several nearby vehicles and drive away. One of the fugitives was Ronnie Biggs, who is now considered a key figure in the Great Train Robbery. However, initially, he did not stand out among the participants in the operation. Moreover, if it weren't for his escape and the subsequent events, his name would hardly have become known even within the context of this story, as he was a fairly ordinary member of the group. At the age of 30, Ronnie Biggs was working in construction. At the same time, he was involved in petty thefts and fraud, which led him to meet Bruce Reynolds. Both served short sentences in the same prison at the age of 20. A few years before the robbery, Ron got married and promised his wife that he would give up his criminal past, keeping that promise for 3 years. In his marriage, Biggs had a child, and another was on the way, which prompted him to consider buying a house. The down payment for the house was $500, and Ronnie decided to borrow that amount from his friend Bruce Reynolds. Bruce refused to lend the money, instead offering to involve him in the planned train robbery, which promised a significantly larger return. In the end, Ronnie received his share, amounting to nearly $140,000, instead of the requested $500. Although Ronnie Biggs was a minor figure in the team, the judge sentenced him to 30 years in prison. It is unclear what exactly prompted his escape. It could have been a sense of injustice due to the harsh punishment or a desire for freedom. Most likely, both factors played a role. Ronnie spent a quarter of his share from the robbery to pay the organizers and participants of the escape, in return gaining something far more valuable: freedom. After that, Biggs went into hiding for several months. He then crossed the English Channel by boat and reached Paris, where he repeated the mistake of his colleague Edwards by opting for a painful yet almost useless plastic surgery. When a journalist encounters Biggs 10 years later on another continent, he will notice that he looks almost the same as before. In any case, in 1965, Ronnie Biggs arrived in Australia under a different name, and soon his wife and children joined him. They settled in a small town, and Biggs began working legally as a carpenter. It is unknown how long this family tranquility would have lasted if, 3 years later, Ronnie had not come across articles about his former accomplices. By 1968, Ronald Edwards and Bruce Reynolds found themselves in the hands of British law enforcement. The main reason for their arrest was issues with hiding and dwindling finances for both of them. Additionally, being on the run proved to be mentally taxing. Bruce Reynolds spent 5 years in Mexico. The business did not succeed, and the money ran out. He attempted to return to England discreetly, hoping to find work in criminal circles, but no one wanted to deal with him. The police were actively searching for Reynolds, and he had become a toxic figure for his former associates. Surrendering became a more appealing option, especially considering that all the participants in the robbery who received prison sentences had already filed appeals and were able to significantly reduce their sentences. By the 70s, they would all be released. Edwards and Reynolds understood that they would likely be sentenced to around 15 years of imprisonment, and they were prepared for that. Ultimately, the first surrendered, while the second was unfortunate. He was discovered in a hidden apartment. According to Reynolds, when he first encountered the police, he felt a sense of relief, as he was tired of life on the run. For Ronnie Biggs, the most bitter moment in the news of his former associate's arrest was that his name appeared in the Australian media. This is something that must be accepted. The final argument in favor of the decision to leave the country is an article claiming that a participant in the Great Train Robbery in Australia is hiding under a pseudonym. Ultimately, Ronnie leaves his wife and children and heads to Panama. There, he learns an interesting fact. Extradition from Brazil to the United Kingdom does not take place. Thus, Ronnie Biggs finds himself in sunny Rio de Janeiro, where his ability to adapt to new living conditions fully manifests. Upon arriving in Brazil, he not only learns the language and wins the affection of the locals, but also finds work in construction while remaining an illegal immigrant. At the same time, Scotland Yard continues its international search for him. Articles about Ronnie regularly appear in the press, but no one knows where he is hiding. In the mid-70s, Ronnie Biggs is accidentally discovered in Brazil by a journalist from a British newspaper. The editor-in-chief of this publication decides to report on. However, the Brazilian authorities are unhappy with the situation. Why are British police taking active measures on their territory? Additionally, they are interested in Ronnie Biggs himself. How has he managed to remain in the country as an illegal immigrant for several years? Perhaps he had criminal tendencies. Ronnie spends several months in isolation before being released after some time. When the Brazilian authorities decide to deport him, they discover that one of his many girlfriends is pregnant. Since he is the father of a future Brazilian citizen, the authorities allow him to stay in the country, albeit without official work rights. For Biggs, this proves to be manageable. By that time, Ronnie is already living in Brazil under his own name and even achieves the status of a local celebrity, using his fame to earn money. However, in 1981, his life takes an unexpected turn. A group of people kidnaps him and sends him to Barbados with the intention of, "I'm sorry, but it seems like the text you provided is not in a recognizable language or may contain errors. Could you please provide a clear paragraph for translation?" Nevertheless, the Supreme Court of Barbados rules in favor of Ronnie and sends him back to Brazil. Surprisingly, he will only return to his homeland in 2001. For decades, he mainly survived on the income from the son of a member of a children's pop group and earned money from occasional gains, such as advertising security systems. After suffering a stroke, he decides to return to his homeland. He is transported on a private plane owned by a well-known British tabloid owner, so that he can serve his remaining sentence in prison. Ronnie Biggs will be released early on health grounds after serving 28 years, 8 years later. He will live for some time longer and pass away in 2013. By the end of the 70s, all those convicted in the Great Train Robbery case had been released early, including those who had been hiding abroad. Charlie Wilson, who organized the first escape, returned to criminal activity and was shot by a hitman in Spain 12 years after his release. After his release from prison, Buster Edwards modestly ran a flower stall, but in the mid-90s, he took his own life. Buster Reed lived a long life. After his release, he earned money by giving interviews and publishing memoirs about the main crime of his life. However, this income did not provide him with the luxurious lifestyle he preferred. The only gang member who was able to manage the stolen money wisely was Gordon Goody. After his release from prison, he moved to Spain, where he opened a small bar and passed away in 2014 at the age of 85. Shortly before his death, Goody revealed the name of the mysterious Ulster man, who worked in the postal service and provided the robbers with important information. According to Goody, the true name of the Ulster man is Patrick McKenna, who indeed worked in the postal service during that time. However, whether he remains the mysterious informant is a question we are unlikely to have answered, just as we will not learn the names of the 3 robbers who were only referred to by their numbers in police records. They were never caught, and their names remained unknown. According to the recollections of one of the Scotland Yard investigators, law enforcement knew who these criminals were, but were unable to gather any evidence against them. Over the decades, many participants in the events have given interviews and even written autobiographies, presenting often contradictory accounts of what happened. A common theme among many of the robbers' recollections is the desire to portray themselves in a more significant light, appearing smarter and more important than they actually are. However, upon closer examination, relying on documents, police reports, and archival publications, it becomes clear that the Great Train Robbery was not as significant as it is often made out to be. The reasons for the ultimate failure of the robbery participants can be attributed to carelessness, laziness, excessive self-confidence, or insufficient mental ability, or perhaps a combination of all these factors. The only question is their relative proportions. It remains clear why the criminals have sought to maintain the myth of the grand robbery over the past decades. The goal for which it was conceived was not achieved. In the end, none of them were able to significantly change their lives. One of the robbers later admitted that his main motivation for participating in the robbery was the desire to avoid the fate of his father, who died in the same poverty in which he was born. However, upon examining the biographies of the crime participants, it becomes evident that this is precisely what happened to them. Ultimately, they were left with nothing but the myth of the Great Train Robbery. I have no text to translate. Please provide the excerpt you would like me to work on, and I will be happy to assist you.